I walked into the kitchen expecting leftovers and laughter, but what I found was a silent declaration of war. The divorce papers weren't just signed, they were strategically placed. As if you wanted me to see them. As if you wanted to break me. But he didn't know who he was dealing with, until now. I stood there, frozen in the doorway, my breath caught in my throat. The room, once familiar and comforting, now felt suffocating. The dim light from the hallway cast long shadows, and there it was, lying innocently on the kitchen counter, the divorce papers. Perfectly printed, perfectly folded, and perfectly placed. My heart pounded in my chest, each beat louder than the last. The world around me blurred as my mind struggled to comprehend what I was seeing. This couldn't be real. Not after everything we had been through, not after all these years. And yet, there it was, undeniable and cold, a betrayal, neatly packaged and ready for signatures. The moment stretched on, as if time had slowed. My mind raced, unable to catch up with the gravity of the discovery. How could he? How could the man I had shared my life with, my love, my hopes, prepare to leave me without a word? Without a conversation? I had always thought we were a team. We had built a life together, conversations, promises, plans for the future. And yet here it was, a neatly drafted plan for my exit, and in his eyes, nothing more than a formality. I backed away from the papers slowly, as though they might leap off the counter and strangle me with their cold finality. But the room felt suffocating, like it was closing in on me, and I couldn't breathe. My hands shook uncontrollably as I reached for my phone. I needed to know more. I needed to confirm that what I was seeing wasn't some cruel joke or a twisted misunderstanding. But deep down, I knew it wasn't. This was real. My husband, my partner, had been planning his escape for months, and I was nothing more than an afterthought in his carefully orchestrated exit. The betrayal hit me like a wave, a tidal force that swept through every part of my being. It was as though the ground had been ripped from beneath me, leaving me to fall endlessly. My vision blurred, my stomach turned. How had I been so blind? How had I failed to see the signs? The late nights, the strange messages, the distance growing between us. It had all been there, in front of my face, yet I had been too trusting, too naive to acknowledge it. I stood there for what felt like an eternity, the silence in the house deafening. His presence in the next room, still blissfully unaware, only made the betrayal feel sharper. I wanted to scream, to shout, to confront him right then and there, but something held me back. Maybe it was the numbness settling in my bones, or maybe it was the realization that I had already lost him. He had already checked out, long before I had found those papers. The next morning, Ronan walked into the kitchen like nothing had changed. He greeted me with a smile, his voice light, as if nothing had happened, as if I hadn't just uncovered the deepest betrayal of my life. "Hey babe, want me to make you an omelet?" he asked, his tone casual, as if this was any other day. I felt the anger rise in me, a fire building deep within, but I held it in. I couldn't give him the satisfaction of seeing my pain. Not yet. Instead, I muttered a quick "No, I'm good," and turned away, unable to even look at him. His presence, his voice, made my skin crawl. I could feel his indifference. The way he treated this whole thing is nothing more than a business transaction. I watched him as he went about his morning routine, seemingly unaware of the storm brewing inside me. As he showered, I walked into his office, my hands trembling as I opened the door. I knew exactly what I was looking for. And there it was, stacked neatly beside his printed tray. Another manila folder. This one, however, was filled with divorce documents. Unfiled, unsigned, but ready to go. My name was printed at the top, bold and clear. He hadn't even bothered to hide them. There was no explanation, no notes, not even a scribbled thought. Just the cold, clinical logistics of dividing assets, determining custody of the dog, and a note about the divorce settlement. I sat there, in his office, for what felt like an eternity, the folder clutched to my chest. The weight of it, the finality of it, pressed down on me. I had shared my life with this man. I had loved him. And now, he was preparing to discard me without a second thought. I had been nothing but a convenience to him, a stepping stone in his life. And that was the hardest pill to swallow. As the day wore on, I moved through the motions. I cooked dinner, set the table as I always did, and even lit the same stupid candle I used to light when we first moved into this house. I could almost hear the echoes of our early days together, the happiness, the excitement of building a future. But that future was long gone. Ronan was already gone. The man I had married, the man I had trusted, had left me months ago. What remained was a hollow version of him, a stranger wearing his face. That night, after dinner, I sat alone in the quiet of the house. The silence was unbearable. It was in that silence that I realized the truth. I was no longer a part of his life. I was nothing more than a stranger, a character in a story he had already finished writing. And for the first time, I understood the depth of the betrayal. He wasn't just leaving me. He was erasing me. And that was the hardest part to accept. But it wasn't over. It couldn't be. Not like this. With a deep breath, I resolved to fight. Not just for the marriage I had believed in, but for the woman I had become. I was no longer willing to sit back and accept the lies. I was going to expose them. I was going to fight for my dignity. And I wasn't going to let him get away with it. The journey ahead wouldn't be easy. But it was mine to take. And I would take it, step by step, until I had nothing left to lose. The quiet hum of the office was interrupted only by the sound of my hands shaking as I opened the folder. There, neatly tucked inside, was the property transfer agreement, its contents still too fresh to fully comprehend. My breath caught in my throat as I scanned the pages, the cold, sterile legal jargon blurring before my eyes. And then, I saw it. My name, printed, clear, and bold, twice in the signature block. But I hadn't signed it. I hadn't agreed to this. The blood drained from my face as my mind raced, trying to piece together what this meant. I flipped the page, heart pounding as the date at the top registered. 3 days ago. That's when this had been prepared, the document crafted and ready to go, a quiet move in a game I hadn't even known we were playing. It wasn't just a property agreement, it was a betrayal. A calculated attempt to erase me, to hide the truth and ensure I never even saw it coming. The signature at the bottom, however, wasn't mine. It wasn't even close. It was clean, precise, an exact replica of my digital signature from years ago, the one I had used when we refinanced the mortgage. The cold realization hit me like a ton of bricks. My husband had forged my name, had manipulated me, had taken control of everything I thought was mine. And there was no denying it now. I slammed the folder shut, a burst of anger and disbelief rising within me. How could I have been so blind? How could I have trusted him, given him everything, when he was clearly only out for himself? I hadn't even seen the signs, had I? The late nights, the business trips, the distant coldness that had started to take root in our relationship. It all made sense now, but it didn't make it any easier to swallow. My fingers curled into fists as I tried to steady myself. The rage swelled up inside me, but so did something else, fear. Fear of what came next, fear of how far this betrayal had gone. It wasn't just a simple matter of him wanting out. No, this was calculated. This was a plan he had put into motion without a second thought for the years we'd spent together. For the life we had built. I couldn't sit with this knowledge any longer. I couldn't pretend that everything was fine when it was so clearly not. The worst part was the emotional toll. The constant back and forth in my mind. The questions I asked myself over and over, how had he managed to fool me for so long? Why hadn't I seen this? But then I thought about the first time I had walked into our shared home, thinking that everything was secure. I remembered how the walls used to feel warm, like they were holding us up, sheltering us from the outside world. And now, they felt cold, as though they were just waiting to fall apart, waiting for the secrets to surface. The next few days were a blur. My thoughts constantly shifted between the shock of betrayal and the numbness that began to take hold. I couldn't tell anyone what I had discovered, not yet. There were too many questions, too many unknowns. But I knew one thing for certain: I couldn't let this go. I had to fight. Not just for the house, not just for the money, but for my dignity. For the woman I used to be, the woman who had trusted him, who had given him everything. But as much as I wanted to confront him, to demand answers, I couldn't bring myself to do it. Not yet. The timing had to be right. If I acted too soon, I risked losing everything: control, leverage, even myself. I needed to play this carefully, one step at a time, and figure out what else he was hiding. I needed to know just how deep this deception ran before I made my move. So, I took the first step, gathering evidence. Every document, every message, every shred of proof that I could find. And with every piece I uncovered, I felt myself gaining a little more strength. I wasn't helpless. I wasn't powerless. I had the ability to reclaim my life, to put the pieces back together, and to expose him for who he truly was. But as I sat in silence, surrounded by the weight of the truth, one question still gnawed at me: where do I go from here? How do you begin to rebuild trust when it's been shattered so completely? How do you move forward when you're not even sure of who you're supposed to be anymore? For now, all I could do was wait. Wait for the right moment to act. And when that moment came, I would be ready. Because I wasn't going to be a victim in this story. Not anymore. I wasn't going to let him take away everything I had worked for, everything I had fought for. The house, the money, the life we had built, none of it mattered anymore. What mattered was taking back control. What mattered was finding my strength again, in the face of the deepest betrayal. The pain was still there, raw and sharp, but I could feel the healing beginning. Every step I took toward uncovering the truth, every moment I spent reflecting on the past, was a step closer to reclaiming my future. The road ahead wouldn't be easy, but I would face it with everything I had. And when the time was right, when I had everything I needed, I would confront him. I would expose him for the fraud he was. And I would walk away with my head held high, knowing that I had found my strength in the midst of the storm. Because that was what mattered most, finding the courage to rise above it all. And that was exactly what I intended to do. As I sat in the quiet of my living room, my mind raced, preparing for the battle ahead. Each new document, each new discovery, fueled my resolve. I wasn't just fighting for my dignity anymore. I was fighting for my future, for the person I used to be, and the person I was going to become. But the hardest part was yet to come. Ronan had spent so much time constructing a life for us, an illusion of stability and success, but now that I saw the cracks in it, everything felt unreal. The quiet, smug smile that always accompanied his words, the way he carried himself as if he were untouchable, those were the things that had always made me doubt myself. Now I knew the truth. It wasn't my own weakness I had been seeing all these years. It was his power over me, the way he manipulated everything, every decision, to make me feel small, to keep me silent. The phone buzzed again. Another email. A document that could be a game changer. As the days passed, I felt a shift inside of me. What once was a steady stream of fear and uncertainty began to change, to mold into something firmer, something stronger. I wasn't going to let this define me. I wasn't going to let Ronan have the last word. I had taken the first step, gathering evidence, but I knew the real fight hadn't even begun yet. The legal battles, the personal ones, the emotional ones, they were all waiting for me. But this time, I wasn't afraid of what I would find. I was ready to face the truth, no matter how ugly it was. I wasn't going to sit back and let him tear apart my life. No. I was going to stand tall and let him know that I had learned how to fight back, how to reclaim my story from the ashes he had tried to leave me in. And as I prepared for the next phase, for the moment when everything would come crashing down, I couldn't help but wonder if he ever truly knew me. If he ever really understood the woman he was trying to break. Because no matter how hard he tried, no matter how far he went to destroy me, one thing was clear: I would never let him win. Not now. Not ever. The sting of betrayal hit me like a punch to the gut, leaving me breathless, unable to process the enormity of it all. And it wasn't just the affair itself that shattered me. It was the fact that she had hidden it from me for so long, pretending that everything was fine while the truth festered beneath the surface, slowly poisoning everything we had built together. All this time, I thought I was walking through life with someone who loved me, with someone who shared my dreams. And now, that illusion crumbled before me. But as the anger began to subside, it was replaced by a deep, soul-crushing sadness. I had given so much to her, to us. My heart had been wide open, my trust given freely, and this was how it all ended. I felt like a fool, like I had been living in a fantasy, blind to the truth that everyone else seemed to know. The world I had built was crumbling, and I was powerless to stop it. The sadness washed over me in waves, making it hard to breathe, hard to think. How could everything change in an instant? And then there was the confusion. How had I missed it? How had I been so blind to the signs? The late nights, the secrecy, the way she had withdrawn from me, things that, in hindsight, I should have questioned long ago. But no, I had chosen to ignore them, convincing myself that everything was fine. I had convinced myself that it was just life, that we were both busy, that we were in a phase, a rough patch maybe, but nothing to worry about. I ignored the red flags because I wanted to believe that love could fix it all. I wanted to believe that everything would get better if we just tried harder. But how could I not see it? How could I have been so naive? The walls that had once felt like a safe haven, the walls that had once held us together, now felt cold, distant, as if they, too, were preparing to crumble under the weight of this revelation. I sat in silence, unable to speak, unable to even think. All I could hear was the sound of my own heartbeat, the noise in my head drowning everything else out. The next few days were a blur of emotions. Shock, disbelief, anger, and sadness all mixed together, leaving me in a state of numbness. I couldn't escape it. Everywhere I went, the weight of the betrayal followed me. The look in her eyes, the way she pretended it was nothing, the casual indifference as if nothing had changed. How could she be so calm? How could she act like nothing was wrong, like she hadn't just torn apart everything we had? And then there was the inevitable question, what now? What do I do with this information? How do I move forward when everything I thought I knew was a lie? I felt lost. My thoughts were tangled in a web of confusion. What if I confronted her? Would it even matter? What if it destroyed everything we had left? But could I live with this weight on my shoulders, knowing what I now knew? It took me days to work up the courage to speak to her. The moment finally came when I stood in front of her, shaking, but determined. "You owe me an explanation," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. Her face flickered with surprise, and then that familiar mask slipped back into place. She tried to apologize, tried to explain, but her words felt empty. She claimed it was a mistake, that it didn't mean anything, but I wasn't foolish enough to believe that anymore. I stood there, looking at her, feeling the ache in my chest deepen. "You lied to me," I said, my voice finally strong enough to cut through the fog of hurt. "You lied to me for so long, and now everything is shattered." She looked at me with tears in her eyes, but I wasn't sure if they were for me or for herself. "I never meant to hurt you," she whispered. But that wasn't enough. Her regret didn't undo the damage she had done. It didn't bring back the trust, the love, or the future we once had. The silence that followed was suffocating. The words I wanted to say stuck in my throat, trapped between anger and betrayal. How could she? How could she stand there and pretend that this was something that could be fixed with a few tears and empty promises? But as the days passed, something shifted inside me. I realized that I didn't need her explanation. I didn't need her apology. What I needed was justice. I needed to reclaim my life, my dignity, and my peace. I couldn't let this be the end of my story. She may have torn apart my world, but I wasn't going to let her be the one to dictate the rest of it. I began to make plans, quietly at first, but with increasing determination. I gathered evidence, made phone calls, and reached out to people who could help me navigate this mess. I wasn't going to let her walk away unscathed. She had betrayed me, and now it was time for me to take control back. But even as I set the wheels in motion, a part of me hesitated. Could I really go through with it? Could I really tear down the life we had built together? Could I turn this into a war, as painful as that would be? But then I thought about the years of lies, the betrayal that had been hidden beneath a mask of affection. No, I couldn't let her get away with this. Not anymore. The anger started to build again, this time not from a place of hurt, but from a place of strength. I had been blindsided, yes, but I was awake now. I saw everything clearly. She wasn't going to win. I walked away from her, not in anger, but in resolve. There was no going back. I had nothing left to lose, but everything to gain. And then, the unexpected happened. The next morning, a message came through from an anonymous number. At first, I thought it was a prank, but the word struck me like a cold slap to the face. You think you can just walk away? You have no idea what's coming. I stared at the screen, my breath catching in my throat. Who was this? And why did it feel like another layer of the betrayal was waiting just around the corner? The uncertainty lingered like a cloud, but one thing was certain now: I wasn't alone in this fight. I had allies. People who knew the truth, who would stand by me. I was no longer just a victim. I was a survivor. And with every move I made, I knew I was getting closer to something bigger. Something that would not just set me free, but tear down the empire they had built on lies and deceit. As I sat there, staring at my phone, I knew one thing: this wasn't over. It was just beginning. And when the dust settled, it wouldn't be her name on the victory banner. It would be mine. Kurt had always thought of himself as someone who could